"No one ever kissed me," said the Apache girl. The cowboy bent down and did it, leaving her speechless in ways that would change both their lives forever. But before we get to that moment, before we witness the kiss that broke years of isolation, we need to understand how two lonely souls found each other in the most dangerous night of their lives. The merchant's hand froze halfway to the coin purse. His weathered fingers trembled slightly as his eyes locked onto sterling Maddox with something that looked like warning, or maybe fear, or perhaps both twisted together into something worse. Sterling had just mentioned casually that he'd be taking the northern trail through Red Canyon, the shortcut that would save him 2 days on his journey to the ranch past the ridge. It was an innocent statement, the kind of travel detail exchanged between strangers conducting business. But the way the merchant's face drained of color suggested Sterling had just announced plans to walk into hell itself. The trading post fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The merchant leaned across the rough wooden counter, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon something dark and terrible. "Don't go near the cabin with the red door." His words were urgent, pressed out between clenched teeth. "That woman who lives there, she's not right in the head, not right in the soul. People who get too close to her, they don't come back the same. Some don't come back at all." Sterling should have listened. He should have asked more questions, demanded specifics, changed his route. But he was tired from weeks on the trail, eager to reach his destination, and skeptical of superstitious warnings from old men who spent too much time alone with their thoughts. He thanked the merchant, pocketed his supplies, and rode north toward the canyon, toward the cabin with the red door, toward a night that would reshape everything he thought he understood about loneliness and connection, and what it means to truly see another human being. The storm came faster than he expected, rolling over the ridge like divine judgment. One moment the sky was merely gray and threatening. The next, rain hammered down in sheets, so thick Sterling could barely see his horse's ears. Lightning split the sky in jagged white scars, illuminating the canyon walls in brief, terrifying flashes. Thunder followed immediately, shaking the ground beneath his horse's hooves. The trail turned to mud within minutes, sucking at his horse's legs with every struggling step. This wasn't just bad weather. This was the kind of storm that killed travelers, that swept them off narrow paths into ravines, that left bodies undiscovered until spring. His horse stumbled, nearly throwing Sterling into the darkness. Water poured down his face into his eyes, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. He needed shelter immediately, needed it desperately, and that's when he saw it through the downpour. A cabin, small and isolated, barely visible in the lightning flashes. Smoke rose from a chimney, meaning someone was home, meaning there was warmth and safety from the killing storm. And on the door, faded but unmistakable even through the rain, a splash of red paint. Sterling's stomach tightened. The merchant's warning echoed in his mind. But another crack of thunder, another stumble from his exhausted horse, and the decision made itself. He had no choice. The storm was getting worse by the second. He would take his chances with whatever waited behind that red door rather than die of exposure in a canyon that would become a river before morning. When he knocked, the sound seemed swallowed by the storm. He waited, shivering, wondering if anyone had heard. Then the door opened, but only inches, just wide enough for a face to appear in the gap. A woman's face, young and angular, with dark eyes that burned with something between fury and terror. She was Apache. He could see that immediately. Long black hair plastered against her face from rain leaking through the roof. Her hand gripped a knife, knuckles white with tension. And in her eyes, Sterling saw something that stopped his prepared greeting cold. She wasn't just afraid of him. She was afraid of something else, something behind him in the darkness, something worse than a stranger appearing at her door in the middle of a deadly storm. "You need to leave right now." Her voice was steady, controlled, but her breathing wasn't. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her whole body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Sterling raised his hands slowly, deliberately non-threatening. "Just need shelter until the storm passes, ma'am. I won't cause trouble, won't ask for anything except a dry corner to wait out the rain. That's what they all say. Her eyes darted past him, scanning the darkness behind him like she expected something else to emerge from the rain. Something with teeth and malice. Something that would make a lone traveler seem harmless by comparison. The wind howled, slamming a loose shutter against the cabin wall with a crack like a gunshot. Sterling's horse whinnied in panic, pulling against the reins tied to a post. The woman's jaw tightened. She looked at him, really looked at him, studying his face in the lightning flashes. And for a brief moment, something flickered across her expression. Loneliness. Raw and desperate, and so profound it made Sterling's chest ache. Then it vanished behind that wall of anger and fear. 1 hour. Her voice was flat, final. You stay by the door. You don't ask questions. You don't look at me. And when the rain stops, you leave and you forget this place exists. Do you understand? Sterling nodded. He understood the words, even if he didn't understand the fear behind them. She stepped back, opening the door just wide enough for him to slip through. He entered quickly, water streaming from his coat and hat, forming puddles on the rough wooden floor. The door slammed shut behind him, and he heard the bolt slide home with a finality that made him wonder if he'd just traded one danger for another. The cabin was smaller than it looked from outside. One room, maybe 12 feet square, with a fire burning low in a stone hearth. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with sage and something else Sterling couldn't identify. A single bedroll lay in the corner. A small table held a chipped plate and cup. Dried meat hung from the rafters. It was the dwelling of someone who lived alone, who expected to always live alone, who had arranged their entire existence around the absence of other people. But it was the walls that caught Sterling's attention. Marks, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, carved deep into the wood. Tallies, like she was counting something. Days, maybe. Or years. Or something else entirely. They covered every wall, clustered thick in some places, sparse in others, telling a story Sterling couldn't read, but could feel in his bones. This was the dwelling of someone keeping track, someone measuring time in a way that suggested each mark represented something survived rather than something lived. She moved to the far corner, keeping the room between them, the knife still in her hand. She didn't take her eyes off him. Not once. Not even to blink. Sterling stayed by the door as instructed, water dripping from his coat, forming a pool at his boots. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. But underneath it, Sterling felt something else. A tension that had nothing to do with fear. She was studying him the way a scholar studies a text, looking for meaning in every detail, every movement, every breath. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder rolling across the canyon in waves. Sterling counted the seconds between lightning and sound. The storm was directly overhead now. He wasn't going anywhere for hours. He lowered himself slowly onto a rough wooden stool near the door, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. The woman tensed, her hand tightening on the knife, but she didn't object, didn't speak, just watched him with those burning dark eyes. Minutes passed. 5, then 10, then 15. The silence became unbearable. Sterling had spent weeks alone on the trail, was comfortable with quiet. But this was different. This was charged, electric, like the air before lightning strikes. He could feel her attention on him like a physical weight. Could sense her mind working, trying to categorize him, trying to figure out if he was a threat or just another lost traveler who would leave and never think of her again. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Sterling spoke. "Why do you live out here alone?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them, before he could remember her rule about not asking questions. Her eyes flashed with anger. "I said no questions." But Sterling saw something else beneath the anger. A hunger to be asked, to be seen, to have someone care enough to wonder about her story. He pressed forward gently. "The merchant in town, he warned me about you. Said people don't come back the same after they see you." What did he mean? She turned away, facing the wall covered in tally marks. Her shoulders were rigid, her breathing shallow. When she spoke again, her voice was different, quieter, broken, like something inside her had cracked open despite her best efforts to keep it sealed. Because I make them see things they don't want to see. I make them feel things they've spent their whole lives running from. And they hate me for it. They call me a witch, a curse, a poison. They blame me for their wives leaving, for their daughters refusing to marry, for every uncomfortable truth they can't face about their own empty lives. Sterling took a step closer. Not much, just enough to test the boundary. She stiffened, but didn't turn around. Don't. Her hand tightened on the knife, but he saw it now. The tremor in her fingers. The way she held herself like she was barely keeping something contained. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what might happen if he stayed. Afraid of the conversation she hadn't had in years. Afraid of the connection she'd convinced herself she didn't need. Outside, the storm raged on with renewed fury. Inside, something far more dangerous was beginning to build. Because Sterling Maddox had broken the first rule. He'd ask questions. And now he couldn't stop wondering what other rules were about to break before the night was over. And why, despite every warning, despite the fear in her eyes, despite the knife in her hand, he didn't want to leave. The rain hammered against the cabin roof like 1,000 angry fists demanding entry. Sterling stood motionless by the door, water pooling at his boots, watching her move through the shadows. She hadn't looked at him again since letting him inside. Just kept that knife in her hand, her back to him, shoulders rigid as iron. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across those tally marks. Outside, thunder rolled across the canyon in waves. Sterling counted the seconds between lightning and sound. For seconds, 3 seconds, 2. The storm was directly overhead now. He wasn't going anywhere, and they both knew it. You can sit. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. Flat and cold and devoid of emotion. Just stay on that side of the room. Sterling lowered himself onto the rough wooden stool, his wet clothes clinging to his skin. He was starting to shiver, the cold finally penetrating his defenses. The cabin was sparse in a way that spoke of deliberate isolation. No photographs, no letters, no personal items beyond the absolute necessities. This wasn't a home. This was a survival shelter, a place to exist rather than live. How long have you lived here? The question came out before he could stop it. She turned then, and he saw her face fully for the first time in the firelight. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe 22. But her eyes looked ancient, haunted, carrying the weight of decades compressed into years. Beautiful in a way that made his chest tighten, but it was the beauty of something wild and untamed and damaged by repeated rejection. 3 years alone. Her voice was steady. The way it needs to be. The way it has to be. Why? Because people fear what they don't understand. Her jaw set, muscles clenching. And I make them understand things they've spent their whole lives pretending don't exist. I look at them, and they see themselves reflected back, completely bare, all their lies and compromises and quiet deaths exposed. And they can't stand it. So they call me cursed and dangerous, and tell their children to stay away from the woman with the evil eye. Sterling leaned forward slightly, drawn by the raw pain in her voice. Like what? What do you make them see? She moved closer, just 2 steps, but it felt like she'd crossed a chasm. The knife glinted in the firelight. She stopped at the edge of the shadows, her face half illuminated, half hidden in darkness. Like the fact that they're empty inside. That they married the wrong person or no person at all. That they're dying slowly in lives they hate, suffocating under the weight of duty and expectation and other people's dreams. I look at them and they see themselves completely, without the comfortable lies they tell to get through each day. And they can't forgive me for it. Her voice was steady, controlled, but something underneath it trembled. Not fear. Something raw. Loneliness, so deep it had calcified into armor, hardened into a shell she wore to survive. So they call you cursed, Sterling said softly. They call me worse than that. She laughed, bitter and sharp. Witch, demon, poisoner of minds. The last person who came here was a woman from the settlement. She said I put thoughts in her head, made her leave her husband, destroyed her family. She looked Sterling straight in the eye, and he felt the force of that gaze like a physical blow. I didn't put anything in her head that wasn't already there. I just didn't lie to her about it. I didn't tell her to stay in a marriage that was killing her slowly. I didn't pretend her life was fine when we both knew it wasn't. The rain intensified, battering the walls with renewed fury. A leak opened in the corner, water dripping steadily into a wooden bucket placed there, as if she'd been expecting it. She moved to adjust the bucket, and for a moment her body was close enough that Sterling caught her scent. Sage and smoke and something wild he couldn't name, something that made his pulse kick up without permission. She froze, sensing the shift in the air between them. Her eyes snapped to his, dark and burning. Don't what? Whatever you're thinking right now, stop thinking it. But she didn't move away, didn't raise the knife, didn't retreat to her corner. Just stood there, breathing shallow, her body tense like a bowstring pulled taut, like she was fighting herself as much as him. The fire cast dancing shadows across her face. A strand of wet hair clung to her cheek. Sterling's fingers itched to brush it away, to cross the distance between them, to test whether the connection building in this small cabin was real or just a product of isolation and storm and proximity. Why did your tribe exile you? The question came out rougher than he intended. Her face went blank, carved from stone. That's not your concern. Was it because of this? Because you tell people the truth they don't want to hear? Something flickered in her expression. Pain, quick and sharp, there and gone in an instant. My mother was Apache. My father was a man who passed through the camp one summer and left before I was born. A white man, a traitor, someone whose name I never learned. The tribe tolerated me because of my mother, but they never accepted me. Half-blood, they called me. Tainted. When I reached the age for marriage, no one would have me. They said I would bring bad fortune to any man brave enough or foolish enough to try. She turned away, her voice dropping lower, barely audible over the storm. So I left before they could cast me out officially. Better to choose your own exile than wait for them to do it. Better to leave with some dignity intact. Sterling stood slowly, every movement deliberate and careful. And you've been here 3 years? Alone? Never leaving? Where would I go? She didn't turn around. I have no family who'll claim me, no tribe that wants me, no place in either world. White people see me as savage. Apache people see me as contaminated. This cabin is all I have. That's not living. Sterling took another step closer. That's just surviving. There's a difference. Her shoulders stiffened. What would you know about it? What would you know about being alone? So long you forget what another person's voice sounds like. About going days without speaking because there's no one to speak to? About wondering if you're going to die out here and no one will ever know or care. More than you think. Sterling's voice was quiet but firm. I've been on the trail for 8 years. Moving from job to job, town to town, never staying long enough for anything to matter. Different kind of loneliness maybe, but loneliness all the same. She spun to face him, and the look in her eyes nearly stopped his heart. Fury and grief and hunger all mixed together into something almost unbearable to witness. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what it's like to be rejected by everyone who's supposed to love you. To be told you're wrong, fundamentally wrong, just for existing. To spend years wondering what's broken inside you that makes people flee. Her voice broke on the last word, just barely, but Sterling heard it. The crack in the armor. The vulnerability she was desperately trying to hide. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin something else was building. Something more dangerous than wind or rain or lightning. She stood there breathing hard, the knife trembling in her grip, not from fear, but from the effort of holding everything in. And Sterling realized with absolute certainty that staying here tonight might be the most reckless thing he'd ever done. Because the merchant was right. People who got close to her didn't come back the same. He could feel it already. The pull, the need to close the distance between them, to see what would happen if he did. To prove to her that not everyone would run. That some people, the right people, would stay and face whatever truths she reflected back at them. The silence that followed her words was heavier than the storm. Sterling watched her chest rise and fall, watched the way she gripped that knife like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. He should have looked away, should have respected the boundary she'd drawn, should have stayed on his side of the room and waited for morning. But he couldn't stop staring at her, couldn't stop seeing past the anger and fear to the desperate loneliness underneath. "You're doing it right now." Her voice was rough, accusatory. "Looking at me like that. Like what? Like you see something. Like you're trying to figure me out." Her eyes narrowed. "Everyone who looks at me like that eventually hates me for it. Eventually realizes they don't like what they see reflected back. Eventually runs. Maybe they hate themselves," Sterling said quietly. "Not you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you're different? You think you can handle it? You think you're special somehow, immune to what I am?" Sterling took one step closer. She didn't retreat, just stood there, tension radiating from her like heat from the fire. "I think you've been alone so long you've convinced yourself you deserve it. I think you've built walls so high you've forgotten there's another side. I think you're testing me right now, trying to make me leave before I can reject you first." Her face flushed with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. Then prove me wrong." The challenge hung between them like smoke. She stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face for something. Mockery, maybe, or pity, or the kind of hollow curiosity that turns to disgust once satisfied. She wouldn't find any of those things. Sterling had learned a long time ago that loneliness recognized loneliness, and he saw himself reflected in her exactly the way she described, bare, completely exposed, unable to hide behind comfortable lies. The storm chose that moment to intensify. A crack of thunder, so loud it shook the cabin walls, so violent it felt like the sky was tearing itself apart. The fire sputtered, casting wild shadows across the room. She flinched just slightly, and the knife slipped from her fingers. It clattered to the floor between them, and neither of them moved to pick it up. The weapon lay there like a boundary crossed, a barrier removed, a choice made without words. "Why are you really here?" Her voice was quieter now, the anger draining into something else. Exhaustion maybe. Resignation. In this territory, men like you don't just wander through canyons and storms. You're running from something too, aren't you? Sterling ran a hand through his wet hair. "I was heading north. Work on a ranch past the ridge. Pay is decent, work is honest." He paused, weighing how much truth to give her. "And maybe I was tired of sleeping in camps where everyone knows your name, but nobody knows you. Tired of conversations that don't matter. Tired of going through the motions of living without actually feeling anything." Her expression shifted, softened just a fraction. "So you're running too?" "Not running. Just moving. There's a difference." "Is there?" She tilted her head, studying him with new intensity. "Because from where I'm standing, you look exactly like someone trying to outrun something. Pain maybe, or disappointment, or the realization that this is all there is and it's not enough." Sterling felt his jaw tighten. "Maybe. But at least I'm still moving forward. You've been standing still for 3 years, hiding in this cabin, telling yourself it's strength when it's really just fear." The words hit harder than he'd intended. He saw it in the way her face crumpled for half a second before she rebuilt the wall, before she forced her features back into that carefully neutral mask. But it was too late. He'd seen underneath. Seen the girl who'd been rejected by her own people, who'd chosen isolation over constant rejection, who'd convinced herself this was enough because believing otherwise would be unbearable. A second leak opened in the roof, rain dripping steadily onto the wooden floor. She moved to adjust another bucket, and this time when she passed him, her arm brushed his. Just barely. Barely enough to notice. Except Sterling noticed everything. The way her breathing stuttered. The way her pupils dilated in the firelight. The way she stopped moving, frozen in that moment of contact, like she'd forgotten how to function, like her body was reminding her of something her mind had tried to forget. He turned toward her slowly, deliberately. She was less than a foot away now, close enough to see the individual drops of water on her face, close enough to count her eyelashes. Her face tilted up toward his, and in the firelight he could see every angle, every curve, the fierce beauty that had been hidden by fear and anger. She was trembling, but not from cold. From something else entirely. from the force of standing this close to another person after years of solitude, from the terror of wanting something she'd convinced herself she could never have. This is a mistake. Her voice was barely a whisper. You should leave when the rain stops. Forget you were ever here. Forget you ever met me. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes begged him to stay. Her eyes admitted what her mouth couldn't, that she was drowning in loneliness, that his presence here was both torture and salvation, that she wanted him to leave and desperately wanted him to stay in equal measure. Sterling reached out, slow and deliberate, and tucked that strand of wet hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her cheek, and the contact was electric. She inhaled sharply, her whole body going rigid, every muscle tensing like she'd been struck. But she didn't pull away, didn't run, didn't retreat to her corner, just stood there, drowning in whatever was building between them, unable or unwilling to break the connection. How long? His voice was rough, barely recognizable. How long since someone touched you? She closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek in the firelight. Too long. So long I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like. So long I convinced myself I didn't need it. So long that this, right now, feels like coming back to life and it hurts. His thumb brushed the tear away. Her skin was impossibly soft under his rough fingers. Warm. Alive. She leaned into his touch without seeming to realize she was doing it. Her body making choices her mind couldn't control, starving for contact, for gentleness, for proof that she was still human and not just the ghost everyone believed her to be. The storm pounded against the cabin walls. The fire crackled and popped, and somewhere in the space between heartbeats, Sterling realized he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Because he wanted to kiss her. Wanted it with an intensity that bordered on need. Wanted to show her that she wasn't cursed or tainted or dangerous, just lonely, just human, just desperate for someone to see her and not flinch away. Her eyes opened slowly, locking onto his. And in them he saw the same question, the same hunger, the same terror of wanting something you've convinced yourself you can never have. What are you waiting for? Her voice cracked on the question. If you're going to run like everyone else, do it now. Before this gets any worse. Before I start hoping again. Sterling's hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers threading through her damp hair. What if I don't want to run? Then you're even more foolish than I thought. But her body swayed closer to his, drawn by something neither of them could name or control. The distance between them shrank to nothing. He could feel her breath on his lips, could feel the way her heart hammered against her ribs, could sense her teetering on the edge of something terrifying and necessary. One more inch and it would be over. One more second and everything would change. Sterling felt the moment crystallize, felt the weight of it, felt how this decision would ripple forward through both their lives. And then, just as his lips were about to meet hers, just as the distance was about to close completely, they heard it. Footsteps outside the cabin. Heavy, deliberate, multiple people coming closer through the storm. The spell shattered instantly. She yanked back from him, the connection breaking like a physical snap. Her eyes went wide with something that looked like panic mixed with grim recognition. Get away from the window. Her voice was urgent, all business now. Now. Sterling didn't question it. He moved with her toward the far corner of the cabin, pressing against the wall. She grabbed his arm, pulling him down behind the table. Her grip was iron, her whole body vibrating with tension. The fear was different now. Not personal fear. Survival fear. Who is it? Sterling kept his voice low. People from the settlement. Her words were barely audible over the storm. They come sometimes when things go wrong in their lives. Looking for someone to blame. Looking for me. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, Sterling could make out shapes in the darkness. 3 men, maybe 4, moving through the rain toward the cabin. Their voices carried through the storm, angry and slurred. Drunk. That made them more dangerous, more unpredictable, more likely to do something they might regret in the morning, but would do anyway. We know you're in there, witch. A man's voice, rough and mean. Come out. We want to talk to you about what you've done. She pressed her back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing through her nose in controlled bursts. Sterling saw her jaw clench, saw the way her hands balled into fists. This wasn't fear. This was rage being forced into silence. This was humiliation accepted, because fighting back would only make things worse. This was survival at the cost of dignity. My brother's wife left him. The man outside kicked the door, making it rattle in its frame. She said you told her to do it. Said you looked at her and made her see things. Made her hate her own life. You poisoned her mind against her family. I never spoke to your brother's wife. Her voice rang out clear and strong. Despite the tremor Sterling could feel running through her body where it pressed against his. She came here once asking for water. I gave her a drink. That's all. I never said a word about her marriage or her life. You're a liar. Another voice joined in, younger, more volatile. You put thoughts in people's heads. Make them do things they wouldn't normally do. Make them see things that aren't true. Sterling felt her sag slightly against him. She'd heard this before. How many times? How many nights had she hidden in this cabin while people blamed her for their own failures, their own weaknesses, their own inability to face uncomfortable truths? She needs to pay. A third voice, angrier than the others. My sister won't marry now because of what you told her. Says she won't trap herself in a life she doesn't want. Those are your words. Your poison. Those are her words, Sterling thought. Her courage. Her refusal to accept what you wanted to force on her. But he stayed silent, letting the woman beside him handle this her own way. The door rattled as someone tried the latch. Sterling had locked it when he came in, but it wouldn't hold long against determined men. He looked at her in the darkness, saw the resignation in her eyes. She'd already decided she couldn't fight this, that she deserved it somehow, that this was the price she paid for being different. Something hot and fierce surged through Sterling's chest. Without thinking, without planning, he stood. She grabbed his wrist immediately, desperation in her grip. What are you doing? They'll hurt you. Just stay down. Stay quiet. Maybe they'll get tired and leave. Sterling gently removed her hand from his wrist. Let them try. He crossed to the door and pulled it open before she could protest further. The rain hit him immediately, cold and brutal, soaking him again within seconds. For men stood in the mud, drenched through, holding makeshift weapons. A length of wood, a farming tool, a heavy chain. One had a rope coiled over his shoulder, and Sterling didn't want to think about what they'd planned to do with that. They were older than he expected, not young hotheads, but grown men with families, men who should have known better, men who'd spent the evening working up their courage with whiskey. Sterling stepped out fully, pulling the door closed behind him. He was taller than all of them, broader, and stone sober. The difference was immediately apparent. Can I help you, gentlemen? Who are you? The oldest one, the brother whose wife had left, squinted at him through the rain. What are you doing in there with her? Taking shelter from a storm. Sterling kept his voice level, reasonable. Same as you should be doing instead of harassing a woman living alone. You don't understand. The younger one, the sister's brother, stepped forward. She's dangerous. She poisons minds. Makes people do things against their nature. Sterling crossed his arms, making himself bigger, more imposing. Seems to me the only poison here is the whiskey on your breath and the cowardice in your hearts. You're grown men blaming a woman for your own failures. Your brother's wife left because she was unhappy. Your sister won't marry because she's smart enough to want more than settling. Those are their choices. Not her fault. Watch your mouth, stranger. The brother's hand tightened on his wooden club. You don't know what she's done to this town. The pain she's caused. I know exactly what she's done. Sterling's voice dropped lower, harder. Nothing. Absolutely nothing except exist. And you're all out here in a storm, drunk and angry, because it's easier to blame someone else than look at yourselves in the mirror. The men shifted uneasily. The one with the rope glanced at the others, uncertainty creeping into his expression. Maybe we should go. It's late. The storm is bad. No. The young one's face twisted with fury. He's defending her. He's probably under her spell too. We came here to do something, and we should do it. There's no spell. Sterling took a step forward, and the men instinctively stepped back. There's just a woman trying to survive and a bunch of cowards who can't handle the truth when it's spoken plainly. The young man swung wildly, rage overcoming sense. Sterling saw it coming from a mile away, sidestepped easily, and caught the man's wrist mid-swing. He twisted it just enough to make the farming tool drop into the mud, just enough to hurt without breaking anything. The man yelped, stumbling backward into his companions. Leave now. Sterling's voice carried over the storm, commanding and final. All of you. And don't come back. This woman has done nothing to you. Your problems are your own. Deal with them like men instead of drunk cowards in the night. The older brother hesitated, calculation in his eyes. He was weighing his options, considering whether pressing forward was worth the cost. Finally, he spat into the mud, a gesture of impotent anger. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Sterling held his ground, not moving, not backing down. It's over right now. Go home. One by one, they turned and disappeared into the darkness, their curses and threats swallowed by thunder. Sterling stood in the rain for a long moment, letting his heart rate slow, making absolutely sure they were really gone, and not just regrouping in the darkness. Then he turned back to the cabin. She was standing in the doorway, silhouetted by firelight, staring at him like he was something she'd never seen before. Like he was something impossible made manifest. Sterling walked toward her, water streaming from his hair, his clothes plastered to his body for the second time that night. He was shivering now, the cold finally getting through his defenses. Why did you do that? Her voice was barely audible. Why would you risk yourself for someone you just met? Because it was the right thing to do. No one has ever done the right thing for me before. Her voice broke on the last word. No one has ever stood up for me. Not once. Not ever. Everyone just lets them say those things. Lets them threaten me. Lets them blame me. You're the first person who ever defended me. Sterling stopped in front of her, close enough to see the tears mixing with rain on her face. Well, I just did. And I'd do it again. Every time. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes, something fundamental changing in how she saw him, how she saw herself, how she saw what might be possible. Then she stepped aside, letting him back into the warmth. He crossed the threshold, and she closed the door behind them, sliding the bolt home with shaking hands. When she turned to face him, everything had changed. The walls she'd built around herself, the armor she'd worn for 3 years of isolation, had cracks now. Wide cracks. Deep cracks. Cracks wide enough for Sterling to see through, wide enough to reach through if he dared. And the question hanging in the air between them was whether he would dare, and whether she would let him. You're soaked. Her voice was softer now, gentler, carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. You need to get out of those wet clothes before you freeze to death. Can't have you catching your death after defending my honor. Sterling's pulse kicked up despite the cold. And then what? She didn't answer immediately, just moved to the fire, adding wood, stoking the flames higher until heat radiated through the small space. But when she looked back at him over her shoulder, the heat in her eyes had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with what was about to happen next. Sterling peeled off his soaked coat, hanging it on a peg near the door. His shirt clung to his skin, cold and heavy, making him shiver. She watched him from across the room, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. Then she moved to a wooden chest in the corner, pulling out a worn blanket, faded from years of use, but clean and dry. Here. She held it out, but didn't come closer, maintaining the distance like she was still deciding something. It's all I have. He crossed the space between them, taking the blanket from her hands. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and this time neither of them pulled away quickly. The contact lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Thank you. For what you did out there. His voice was quiet. I know it put you at risk. Sterling draped the blanket over his shoulders. Those men were drunk and stupid. Not much of a risk. They'll come back. Her voice carried certainty born from experience. Maybe not tonight, but eventually. They always do. And next time you won't be here to stop them. Then don't stay here. The words came out before he'd fully thought them through. Come with me when the storm breaks. There are places you could go, places where no one knows your story. She laughed, bitter and sad. Where would I go? I have no family who'll claim me, no tribe that wants me, no skills beyond survival. This cabin is all I have. It's not much, but it's mine. It's not a life. It's a prison. Maybe. Her arms wrapped around herself, a gesture of self-protection. But it's mine. At least here, I know what to expect. Out there, I'd just be trading one kind of loneliness for another. At least here, the loneliness is honest. Sterling pulled off his wet shirt, wringing it out near the door. The firelight cast shadows across his chest and shoulders. He saw her glance at him, then quickly look away, but not before he caught the flush creeping up her neck, spreading across her cheeks. She was trying not to look, trying to maintain her composure, but her body betrayed her interest. How old were you when you left your tribe? 17. She kept her eyes fixed on the flames, her voice carefully neutral. I just reached the age where they expected me to marry. But no one would have me. They said I was cursed because of my father, because of the white blood. Half-breed, tainted, bad luck. There was one man who offered, though. He was 40 winters old. Mean. Everyone knew he'd beaten his first wife before she died. But he was willing to take damaged goods. Sterling's jaw tightened, anger building in his chest. They wanted you to marry him. My mother begged me to accept. Her shoulders hunched forward, making her look smaller. She said it was my only chance, that no one else would ever want me, that I should be grateful anyone would take me at all. She said marriage to a cruel man was better than dying alone and unwanted. And your mother now? Niley's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I don't know if she's still alive. I don't know if she ever forgave me for leaving, for choosing this over the life she wanted for me. I don't know if she thinks about me, or if she's erased me completely from her memory. I ran in the middle of the night, took what I could carry, never looked back, never sent word. For all she knows, I died in the wilderness 3 years ago. Sterling moved closer, drawn by the raw pain threading through every word. You chose survival over slow death. There's no shame in that, isn't there? She turned to face him, and he saw tears tracking down her cheeks, glistening in the firelight. What kind of person abandons their own mother? What kind of daughter chooses loneliness over duty? What kind of woman runs instead of endures? The kind who knows her own worth. Sterling reached out, tilting her chin up gently, so she had to meet his eyes. The kind who refuses to let other people's fear define her entire existence. The kind who's strong enough to choose pain over death of the spirit. She stared at him, something breaking apart behind her eyes, some belief she'd held about herself for 3 years starting to crack. You don't understand. I've been alone for so long I've forgotten how to be anything else. I don't know how to trust people. I don't know how to let anyone close without waiting for them to hurt me. I don't know how to be vulnerable without it destroying me. Then start learning. Sterling's voice was gentle but firm. Start right now. With me. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat. Why? Why do you care about a stranger you met hours ago? Why risk yourself for someone everyone else has rejected? Because I see you. Sterling moved closer, eliminating another foot of distance between them. Really see you. Not the curse or the exile or the reputation. Just you. A woman who's been carrying the weight of other people's judgment for so long she's forgotten she's allowed to put it down. A sob escaped her throat, raw and desperate. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold it back, trying to maintain some semblance of control. But Sterling caught her wrist gently, pulling her hand away from her face. Don't hide from me. Not now. I don't know how to do this. Her voice cracked completely. I don't know how to let someone in. I don't know how to trust that you won't leave the moment you really see me. I don't know how to believe this is real. You're already doing it. He pulled her closer slowly, giving her every chance to resist, every opportunity to retreat. She didn't. Just let him draw her against his chest, let her forehead come to rest against his bare skin. He felt her tears hot against his ribs, felt the way she trembled like a leaf in wind, felt the exact moment she stopped fighting and just let herself break. Her arms came around him hesitantly, awkwardly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed, like she thought he might push her away at any moment. Instead, Sterling wrapped his arms around her fully, holding her while she cried out years of loneliness and rejection and accumulated pain. The storm continued to rage outside, thunder rolling across the canyon in waves. But inside the cabin, something was shifting. Something fragile and terrifying and beautiful was being born in the space between them. She clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had always been shifting sand beneath her feet, like he was an anchor she hadn't known she needed. Her fingers dug into his back, holding on with desperate strength. When her sobs finally quieted, when her breathing steadied, she didn't pull away. Just stayed there, pressed against him, breathing in the scent of rain and smoke and something uniquely him. I didn't think anyone would ever hold me like this. Her voice was muffled against his chest. I thought I'd die without ever knowing what this felt like, without ever knowing what it meant to be touched with kindness instead of fear or disgust. Sterling's hand moved to her hair, threading through the long, dark strands that had finally begun to dry. You're not going to die alone in this cabin. I won't let that happen. She tilted her head back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes, her face blotchy from crying. You can't promise that. You'll leave when the storm ends. You'll go to your ranch and forget I exist. That's what everyone does. They pass through, and they forget. No. The word came out more forcefully than he intended. I won't forget you. I couldn't if I tried. You've already changed something in me. Made me feel something I thought I'd lost the capacity for. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the crack in his sincerity that would prove her worst beliefs true. But there wasn't one. And when she didn't find it, something dangerous flickered to life in her expression. Want. Raw and undeniable and terrifying in its intensity. The distance between their mouths was inches, maybe less. Her lips were parted slightly, her breathing shallow and rapid. Sterling felt the pull, magnetic and inevitable, like gravity itself was drawing them together. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone, wiping away the last traces of tears. And then she whispered the words that changed everything, the words that would reshape the entire trajectory of this night. I've never been kissed. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sterling felt them settle into his chest like stones dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward, touching everything. Never? She shook her head, not breaking eye contact. Not once. Not even close. Never. She looked down at her hands, still resting against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palms. When I was younger, there was a boy, Apache. He was kind to me when others weren't. I thought maybe he saw past what everyone else saw, past the taint of my father's blood. I was 15 and foolish and full of hope. What happened? He brought me wildflowers one morning, asked me to walk with him by the river. She smiled, but it was sad and broken, a smile that had never healed properly. I thought he was going to tell me he cared for me, that he wanted to marry me when we were old enough. Instead, he said his mother had forbidden him from being seen with me. Said it would ruin his chances of a good marriage. He gave me the flowers and walked away. I threw them in the river and watched them float downstream. Never spoke to him again. Never let myself hope again. Sterling's hand tightened in her hair, protective and fierce. He was a coward. He was practical. Her voice went flat with acceptance. That's what everyone always was around me. Practical. Afraid. Smart enough to keep their distance. And then, when I left the tribe and came here, there was no one. Just me and the silence, and the people who came to blame me for their problems. For 3 years. 3 years without anyone touching me with kindness. 3 years without anyone seeing me as human. 3 years without anyone touching you at all. She looked up at him, vulnerability written across every line of her face. Until tonight. Until you. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, the thunder growing more distant, the rain softening from a hammering assault to a steady drum. Sterling became acutely aware of how little space remained between their bodies, how her hands were pressed flat against his bare chest, how he could feel her heartbeat, rapid and unsteady, matching the rhythm of his own. "Why did you tell me?" He needed to understand the significance of this admission. "Why tell me you've never been kissed?" "Because I'm tired." Her voice was thick with emotion. "I'm tired of pretending I don't want things. Tired of acting like I chose this loneliness, like it's strength instead of just accumulated scar tissue. Tired of lying to myself that I'm fine, that I don't need connection or touch or proof that I'm worth something to someone." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And you were about to kiss me before those men arrived. I saw it in your eyes, felt it in the air between us. And I've spent the last hour wondering if you'll try again or if that moment is gone forever. You have no idea what you're asking for." "Yes, I do." Her voice was steady now, determined, stripped of all pretense. "I've had 3 years to think about it. 3 years of wondering what it would feel like. If it would be gentle or desperate or somewhere in between. If I'd know what to do or if I'd make a fool of myself. If it would mean anything or if it would just be another moment passing without significance." Her hand came up to cover his, pressing his palm more firmly against her cheek. "I'm asking you to stop making me wonder. I'm asking you to give me this one thing before you leave and I go back to being alone. I'm asking you to be the first person to ever kiss me like I matter." Sterling felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept carefully protected for years. This woman who'd been rejected and isolated and blamed for simply existing was standing here asking him to be her first kiss, trusting him with something she'd never given anyone, offering him a gift he suddenly understood was more precious than anything he'd ever been given. "What if I hurt you? What if this becomes another disappointment in a long line of them? What if you don't?" She countered. "What if this is the one chance I get to feel like a normal woman instead of a curse? What if this is the moment I look back on for the rest of my life as proof that someone once saw me as worth something?" He wanted to tell her it was too fast, that they'd only known each other for a few hours, that this kind of intensity wasn't sustainable. But looking into her eyes, seeing the desperate hope there, he understood that time didn't matter. Not when you'd been alone for so long that every moment of genuine connection felt like a lifetime compressed into seconds. Not when you'd convinced yourself you'd die without ever experiencing something everyone else took for granted. "I don't want to take advantage." His voice was strained with the effort of restraint. "You're vulnerable right now. Emotional. I don't want you to regret this in the morning. Tomorrow, I'll still be alone in this cabin." Her fingers curled against his chest. "Tomorrow you'll be gone, heading north to your ranch and your new life. And this will just be a memory. But at least I'll have the memory. At least I'll know what it felt like, even for one moment. Please don't take that away from me by being noble when I'm asking you not to be." Sterling closed his eyes, fighting for control, fighting against every instinct screaming at him to close the remaining distance. Every fiber of his being wanted to give her what she was asking for, to lose himself in the warmth and want radiating from her. But he also knew that once he crossed that line, there was no going back for either of them. When he opened his eyes, she was watching him with something like desperation written across her features. "Please." The word was barely audible. "Don't make me beg. Don't make me feel pathetic for wanting something this simple." That broke him. The idea that this proud, fierce woman would feel pathetic for wanting a kiss, for wanting proof that she was desirable, for wanting something as basic as human affection. His hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers threading through her hair, and he felt her entire body respond. Her breath caught audibly. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating until they were almost black. And for a moment they just stood there, suspended in the space between wanting and having, between years of loneliness and one moment of connection. Then he pulled her closer, eliminating the last inches between them. Her body melted against his, soft and warm and trembling with anticipation. He could feel every curve of her pressed against him, could feel the rapid flutter of her heartbeat, could sense her barely breathing as she waited for him to make the final move. His mouth hovered over hers, so close he could taste her breath, so close that when he spoke his lips brushed against hers with each word. "Are you absolutely sure?" Her answer was to rise up on her toes, closing the microscopic distance he'd left between them. But before their lips could meet fully, before the kiss could become real, a sound from outside froze them both in place. Horses. Multiple horses approaching fast. And voices calling her name, loud and angry, more of them than before. The drunk men had returned, and this time they brought reinforcements. The moment shattered like glass. She yanked away from him instantly, the connection breaking so abruptly it was almost painful. Her face went pale, all the color draining in a single heartbeat. "How many?" Her voice was mechanical, already preparing for the worst. Sterling moved to the wall, peering through a crack in the wood. His stomach dropped. 8, maybe 10. Some on horseback. They're carrying torches. This isn't just harassment. This is organized. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. They're going to burn it down. The cabin. They've threatened it before, but this time they're actually going to do it. I can see it in how many of them came. This is an ending, not a warning. Not while I'm here. Sterling grabbed his damp shirt, pulling it back on despite the cold discomfort. She laughed, a sound devoid of all humor. "With what?" "You have no weapon. I have a knife." Against 10 men with torches and rage, and probably more whiskey in their bellies than sense in their heads. She sank down onto the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, making herself small. "This is what I deserve. This is what I've always deserved. This is the inevitable conclusion to a life lived wrong from the very beginning." "Don't say that." Sterling crouched in front of her, gripping her shoulders hard enough to make her look at him. "You don't deserve this. You never did. You've done nothing wrong except survive when they wanted you to disappear quietly." Outside, the voices grew louder, more organized, more dangerous. "Come out, witch. This is your last chance. Come out willingly, or we burn you out. Either way, you're leaving this canyon tonight." Niley looked up at Sterling with eyes that had already given up, that had accepted defeat as inevitable. "You should go. Tell them you were just a traveler caught in the storm. Tell them I held you here against your will. They'll let you leave. They'll believe you. I'm not worth dying for." Sterling pulled her to her feet forcefully, making her stand, making her face him fully. "Listen to me very carefully. You are worth it. You're worth fighting for. You're worth protecting. You're worth every risk I might take. And I am not going anywhere. Do you understand me? I am not leaving you to face this alone." Tears streamed down her face, but something in her expression was changing. The resignation was cracking, and underneath it, something fiercer was emerging. Something that looked almost like hope. "Why? Why would you do this for someone you just met? Someone the whole world has decided isn't worth protecting? Because in the last few hours, I've seen more real humanity in you than I've seen in most people I've known my entire life. Because you deserve someone to stand with you instead of always standing against you. Because when I look at you, I don't see a curse or a threat or someone who needs to be driven out. I see a woman who's been brave enough to survive when the whole world told her she shouldn't exist." She stared at him, and he watched the transformation happen in real time. From resignation to determination. From victim to survivor. From someone waiting to be saved to someone ready to fight. "What do? We go out there together." Sterling moved toward the door. "We face them together. We try reason first. If that doesn't work, we improvise. But we do it together. Neither of us runs. Neither of us hides. We stand side by side, and we show them you're not alone anymore. They won't listen to reason. They never do. Then we'll make them listen." He reached for the bolt on the door, then paused, looking back at her one last time. "Whatever happens out there, whatever they say or do, I need you to know something important. You asked me earlier to prove you matter. You already do. More than you know. More than you may ever fully understand." Before she could respond, before the words could fully land, he pulled open the door and stepped out into the night. The rain had mostly stopped, leaving everything dripping and cold and smelling of wet earth. The men were arranged in a semicircle around the cabin, more than he'd counted. At least 12, maybe more. Torches cast wild, dancing shadows across their faces, making them look demonic in the flickering light. The older brother from the first group stood at the front, a torch in one hand and a long blade in the other. His face was flushed with alcohol and righteous anger. You should have left when you had the chance, stranger. Now you're part of this. Now you're complicit in her evil. Part of what, exactly? Sterling kept his voice calm, reasonable, even as his muscles coiled with readiness. Part of you burning down a woman's home because you're too afraid to face your own failures? Part of you becoming murderers because it's easier than admitting you're wrong? She's corrupted you already. The young man from earlier stepped forward, emboldened by numbers. Just like she corrupts everyone. She gets inside your head and makes you see things that aren't real. Makes you doubt everything you know. She needs to be silenced permanently before she destroys more families. And you think murdering her makes you righteous? Sterling shook his head slowly. It makes you cowards. It makes you killers hiding behind masks of justice. It makes you everything you claim she is, but worse, because at least she's honest about what she is. That woman has destroyed families. An older man spoke up, his voice shaking with genuine emotion. My daughter won't speak to me anymore because of her. Says I've been lying to her about what matters in life. Says she can't trust anything I told her growing up. My own daughter looks at me like I'm a stranger, and it's all because of what that witch showed her. Maybe you have been lying. Sterling challenged directly. Maybe your daughter finally saw truth you didn't want her to see. Maybe she grew up and realized the life you wanted for her wasn't the life she wanted for herself. That's not corruption. That's growth. That's becoming her own person. The truth is poison when it comes from her mouth. The brother raised his torch higher, flames dancing dangerously close to the cabin wall. Last chance, stranger. Step aside or burn with her. Your choice. Choose wisely. Sterling felt Natalie move up behind him, felt her presence at his back. She was trembling, but she stood straight, her chin lifted with defiant pride. You want me? Fine. Her voice rang out clear and strong. I'll come with you. I'll leave this canyon and never return. But you let him go. He has nothing to do with this. He's just a traveler who made the mistake of showing me human kindness. No. Sterling's hand shot back, gripping her wrist, keeping her behind him. We both stay, or we both go. I'm not letting them take you anywhere. How touching, the brother sneered, his face twisting with contempt. The witch has found herself a protector. Pity it won't matter in a few minutes. He took a deliberate step forward, torch extended toward the cabin wall. You'll both burn, and the canyon will finally be cleansed. Sterling moved on pure instinct, putting himself between the flame and the wood. The heat licked at his face, close enough to singe his eyebrows. But he didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't back down. You'll have to go through me first. And I promise you, it won't be as easy as you think. The men shifted uneasily, their earlier confidence wavering. They'd come prepared for violence against a helpless woman, not for a physical confrontation with a man who clearly knew how to fight. Some of the torches lowered slightly. Doubt was creeping in, making them remember they were about to commit murder, making them think about consequences. The brother's face twisted with frustrated fury. Then we'll go through you, stranger. Your death is on your own head. But before he could advance, before the violence could escalate beyond the point of return, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. That's enough. Stop this madness right now. An older woman emerged from the shadows beyond the circle of torchlight, leaning heavily on a walking stick. She was Apache, her face weathered by decades of sun and wind, her eyes sharp and commanding. Behind her, 3 more women appeared, all of them Apache, all of them looking at Natalie with expressions Sterling couldn't fully read. Grandmother. Natalie's voice was barely audible, filled with shock and disbelief and something that might have been hope. What are you doing here? Why would you come? The old woman moved forward slowly, each step deliberate and measured. I came to stop you from making a mistake you can never undo." She turned to the men, and her voice carried absolute authority born from years of being respected. "This girl has done nothing to you except show you truths you didn't want to see. Go home, all of you, before you become the monsters you claim she is. Before you commit acts you'll regret for whatever years you have remaining." The brother hesitated, looking between the old woman and Naeli, his resolve cracking visibly. His grip on both torch and blade loosened slightly. "But she poisoned my brother's marriage. She destroyed his family. Your brother's wife left because she was dying inside that marriage." The grandmother's voice was firm but not unkind. "This girl didn't destroy anything. She just refused to lie and tell your sister-in-law that her misery was acceptable. Would you prefer she had stayed and been slowly killed by unhappiness?" Slowly, reluctantly, the men began to disperse. Mounting horses, trudging back toward the settlement, their earlier rage dissipating into shame and confusion. Within minutes, only Sterling, Naeli, and the 4 Apache women remained in the clearing. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water from leaves and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Then Naeli spoke, her voice breaking completely. "Mother, it's really you?" The old woman stepped closer, and Sterling saw the resemblance now. The same angular features, the same dark eyes, the same proud bearing despite years of hardship. "Yes, my daughter, it's me. And I've come to bring you home, if you'll allow it. If you can ever forgive me for letting you go. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of 3 years of loneliness lifting in those final moments, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and connection collide in ways that will leave you breathless. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. And if these tales mean something to you, consider supporting us with a super thanks. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us bring you more unforgettable journeys through the Wild West, where love and survival walk hand in hand. Until next time, remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose connection over safety, truth over comfort, and hope over resignation.